Malachi Thorne had everything a man could dream of: wealth, power, and a loving wife. His business empire stretched across the city, his name carried weight in important circles, and his reputation as a successful entrepreneur was undeniable. People admired him, envied him even, but few knew the secrets that lurked beneath the surface of his seemingly perfect life. His wife, Seraphina Thorne, had been his rock. She had stood by him through thick and thin, supporting his ambitions and even sacrificing parts of her own dreams to ensure his success. As a midwife, she had always been a nurturer, bringing new life into the world while silently praying for her own home to remain intact. But lately, her prayers felt unanswered. Hello, family. Welcome to Storytime Mutually. Kindly subscribe to my YouTube channel for more interesting stories. Like and share this video to your friends and loved ones. Thank you as you do so. Sit back, relax as we dive into the story. Their marriage, once built on love and trust, had become something else: cold, distant, unfamiliar. Malachi had changed. He came home late, avoided her touch, and barely spoke more than a few words during meals. At first, Seraphina had convinced herself it was work stress. Running a business was no easy task, and she wanted to believe he was simply overwhelmed. But deep down, in the quiet corners of her heart, she knew something was wrong. Her suspicions started small. The lingering scent of an unfamiliar perfume on his shirts. The way he would step out of the room to take certain calls. The way he no longer looked her in the eyes when he lied. One evening, as she was preparing dinner, Malachi's phone buzzed on the counter. He was in the shower, humming an old song he used to sing to her when they were happy. Seraphina hesitated. She had never been the type to invade his privacy, but something about the way he had been acting pushed her past her limits. She glanced at the screen. Odessa Langley. The name meant nothing to her, but the message sent shivers down her spine. I miss you. Can't wait to see you tonight. Seraphina's breath hitched. The spoon in her hand clattered onto the counter. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. She stepped back, staring at the phone like it had burned her. Her body went cold, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the sink. This was it. Proof. But as quickly as the shock came, so did a chilling calm. She swallowed the lump in her throat and took a deep breath. Not yet, Seraphina. You need more.
So she didn't say anything.
She went about her night as if she hadn't seen the message, pretending to be the same loving wife she had always been. But inside, she was already preparing herself. And then, 2 days later, fate gave her another clue. Malachi had left for work in a hurry that morning, forgetting his jacket. Seraphina, ever the dutiful wife, picked it up to take to the dry cleaners. But when she reached into the pocket, her fingers brushed against something. A folded hospital card. Her stomach twisted as she pulled it out, unfolding it with slow, deliberate movements. Her eyes scanned the details, and her entire body went rigid. Odessa Langley. Maternity ward appointment. Seraphina swayed on her feet. Her knees felt weak, her throat dry. Maternity ward. This wasn't just an affair. This woman was pregnant. She sank into the nearest chair, clutching the card so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The walls of her marriage felt like they were closing in, suffocating her. She had dedicated 10 years of her life to Malachi. She had loved him, trusted him, built a future with him.
And now?
He had given another woman what he had promised only to her. Pain and rage fought for control inside her. She wanted to scream, to cry, to confront him.
But no.
That wasn't her way. Instead, she waited. She watched Malachi carefully in the days that followed. Every time his phone buzzed, every time he left the house with an excuse, every time his eyes darted away from hers, she noticed it all. He was lying to her. He was betraying her. And he had no idea that she knew. Then, one fateful night, Malachi made the mistake that sealed his fate. It was past midnight when Seraphina was woken by the vibration of a phone. Malachi lay beside her, fast asleep, completely unaware. She turned her head and saw his phone light up on the bedside table. Her heart pounded as she reached for it. A message. Odessa, baby is coming. I need you, love. Serafina inhaled sharply, her fingers gripping the phone so tightly she thought it might crack. Love? He called her love. Her vision blurred with unshed tears, but she forced herself to stay composed. Malachi stirred, yawning as he reached for his phone. When he saw the message, panic flashed across his face. He sat up so fast the bed shook. I have to go, he stammered, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. Serafina kept her voice steady. Go where? He hesitated, then forced a casual tone. Business emergency. Serafina almost laughed. He didn't even try to come up with a convincing lie. She watched as he dressed quickly, grabbed his keys, and rushed out without another word. The moment the door closed behind him, Serafina sat up, her entire body trembling with adrenaline. She reached for her own phone and dialed the hospital. A nurse answered. Greenfield Maternity Hospital. How may I help you? Serafina's voice was calm, steady. This is Serafina Thorne. I'm coming in for an emergency delivery. And just like that, the universe had given her the most perfect, most painful revenge. Because tonight, Malachi was about to walk into the labor room with his mistress, and she, his wife, would be the one waiting to deliver the child. Serafina took a deep breath as she stepped out of the car in front of Greenfield Maternity Hospital. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic, the quiet hum of the night interrupted only by the occasional wail of an ambulance siren in the distance. She adjusted her coat, forcing her trembling fingers to remain steady. She was a professional. She had delivered countless babies in her years as a midwife, guiding mothers through the agony of labor, holding their hands as they brought life into the world. But tonight, she was not just a midwife. Tonight, she was a wife stepping into the room where her husband's betrayal had been laid bare. She walked through the familiar corridors, her heels clicking against the white-tiled floors. The hospital was quieter than usual, with only a few nurses at the station. The night shift had a certain stillness, a deceptive calm before the inevitable storms of childbirth. As she approached the reception desk, the head nurse, Miriam, looked up and smiled. Serafina, you weren't on call tonight. Serafina returned the smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. I know. But I heard there's an emergency delivery. I thought I could assist. Miriam arched an eyebrow. Dr. Patel is already assigned, but we can always use an extra hand. The mother was just admitted. First pregnancy, nervous, in active labor. Serafina's chest tightened. What's her name? Miriam glanced at the chart. Odessa Langley. Serafina's fingers curled slightly at her sides. Odessa Langley. The woman who stole my husband. The woman carrying his child. She exhaled slowly, controlling the fire simmering in her veins. I'll assist. Miriam nodded. Go on in. They're in room 206. Serafina turned and walked toward the room. Her heart pounded with each step. The hallway felt longer than usual, as if the universe itself was stretching this moment, making her feel the full weight of what she was about to do. She stopped outside the door, took another breath, steeled herself, and then, with the calmness of a seasoned midwife, she pushed the door open. The first thing she saw was Odessa on the hospital bed, her face twisted in pain, gripping the sheets as another contraction hit her. The second thing she saw was Malachi. He was pacing by the bed, his face tight with concern, holding Odessa's hand, whispering to her in a way that made Serafina's stomach twist. That used to be me. That used to be us. For a moment, neither of them noticed her. Then Malachi turned and froze. His eyes widened, his lips parting slightly in sheer disbelief. The color drained from his face. Sarah, he breathed. Serafina met his gaze with chilling composure. Hello, Malachi. Odessa, panting through the contraction, didn't notice the tension. Doctor, please help me? Serafina dragged her eyes away from her husband and looked at the woman lying before her. The woman who had unknowingly walked into her domain. She stepped forward, putting on her most professional tone. I'm Serafina. I'll be assisting in your delivery. Malachi's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. His voice was barely above a whisper. Sarah, What are you doing here? Serafina turned her gaze back to him, her expression unreadable. Doing my job. Malachi's jaw clenched. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. This isn't. Before he could finish, Odessa let out a sharp cry, gripping his arm. Malachi. Another one is coming. Malachi flinched, his eyes darting between his wife and his mistress, trapped in a situation he had never expected. Serafina turned to the nurse beside her. Let's check her dilation. She put on a pair of gloves with slow precision, her every movement deliberate. She felt Malachi's stare burning into her, but she refused to acknowledge him. He wasn't the one who mattered now. Odessa mattered. The baby mattered. She examined Odessa with clinical detachment, ignoring the deep pit of emotions roiling inside her. You're at 7 centimeters. The contractions are getting closer. We'll prepare for delivery soon. Odessa groaned. Is it going to take much longer? Serafina gave her a reassuring nod. Not long now. You're doing well. Odessa managed a weak smile. Thank you, my boyfriend said this is a great hospital. Boyfriend. Serafina kept her expression neutral, but she could feel Malachi stiffen beside her. Boyfriend. The word lingered in the air like a bitter taste. She turned to the nurse. Prepare the 4. We need to keep her hydrated. The nurse nodded and got to work. Malachi was still staring at her, still trying to figure out what to say. Serafina finally turned to him, keeping her voice calm. Would you like to step out, Malachi? His eyes widened slightly, caught off guard. I should stay. For her. Odessa squeezed his hand. Please don't leave me. Serafina held back a scoff. The irony of it all. Her husband, standing in this room, holding another woman's hand, not knowing his wife was the one ensuring the safe birth of his betrayal. She turned away, focusing on the task at hand. She was stronger than this. Stronger than him. But as she worked, something in her shifted. A cold, unbreakable resolve settled in her chest. Malachi would regret this night for the rest of his life. Because he thought this was the worst moment. He had no idea that the real reckoning was still to come. The delivery room was thick with tension. The only sounds were the steady beeping of the fetal monitor and Odessa's ragged breathing as another contraction tore through her. Serafina moved with practiced efficiency, checking Odessa's vitals, adjusting the 4 and keeping the atmosphere as professional as possible. But inside, she was a storm. Malachi hadn't spoken since their brief exchange. He stood stiffly by Odessa's side, eyes flickering toward Serafina every few seconds, as if waiting for her to break or explode. She wouldn't give him that satisfaction. She had delivered babies in worse situations, but never had she been so personally invested in the outcome. Odessa groaned, tightening her grip on Malachi's hand. How much longer? She whimpered. Serafina glanced at the clock. You're almost fully dilated. Just a little more. Odessa let out a weak laugh between pants. Oh, God. I didn't think labor would be this painful. Serafina allowed herself a small smirk. You didn't think a lot of things, Odessa. Malachi took a step closer to the bed, his voice soft. You're doing great, baby. Just a little longer. Baby. Serafina's grip on the medical instruments tightened.
He used to call me that.
Her knuckles turned white, but she quickly let out a breath, forcing her hands to relax. She couldn't afford to lose control now. All right, she said, turning to Odessa. I need you to push with the next contraction. Odessa nodded weakly, her forehead damp with sweat. Malachi stroked Odessa's hair gently, whispering words of encouragement. His voice was too familiar, the same tone he had once used when Serafina had been in this very position, bringing their son into the world. A son Malachi had barely spent time with. Serafina swallowed down the bitterness, rising in her throat. Focus on the baby, not the pain. Odessa screamed as another contraction hit. Push, Odessa. Serafina instructed. Odessa pushed, her face contorted in agony. Malachi winced but held on to her, whispering in her ear. You can do it, baby. I'm right here. Serafina kept her face neutral, but inside, something snapped. You're right here now, but will you still be here when the baby is 2 years old and crying for attention? When she's exhausted at 2 a.m. and needs you to take over? When she feels like she's losing herself? She knew the answer. She had lived it. And now Odessa would too. The baby's crowning, Serafina announced. One more big push, Odessa. Odessa let out a guttural scream, gripping Malachi's arms so tightly her nails dug into his skin. And then, a loud wail pierced the room. A baby's cry. The sound of new life. Serafina caught the newborn expertly, swiftly clearing the airways before wrapping the tiny infant in a soft hospital blanket. It's a boy, she announced. Odessa let out a sob, collapsing back against the pillows in exhaustion. Malachi exhaled sharply, his face filled with awe as he looked at the small bundle in Serafina's arms. Serafina cradled the baby gently, looking down at the innocent child who had no idea the chaos surrounding his birth. For a brief moment, she felt nothing but compassion. This child wasn't to blame. It wasn't his fault that his father was a liar. It wasn't his fault that his mother had gotten involved with a married man. He was just a baby, pure, untouched by the sins of the adults around him. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. Then, with a calm she didn't truly feel, she turned to Malachi. Would you like to hold your son? Malachi's lips parted slightly. The moment was surreal for him. His wife was handing him his mistress's child. He hesitated but then reached out. Serafina carefully transferred the baby into his arms. She watched him gaze down at the newborn, a strange mix of emotions crossing his face. Love, fear, guilt, uncertainty.
Good.
Let it sink in, Malachi. Let reality hit you. Odessa, still catching her breath, reached out weakly. Let me hold him. Malachi gently placed the baby in her arms, and she cradled him close, tears slipping down her cheeks. Serafina wiped her hands on a cloth and turned to the nurse. Make sure both mother and baby are stable. I'll step out for a moment. She needed air, needed space. She walked out of the room, each step measured, controlled. As soon as she reached the hallway, she leaned against the wall, finally allowing herself to breathe. It was done. She had delivered the child of her husband's betrayal with her own hands. And yet, she wasn't finished yet, because Malachi still had to face her. And this time, she wasn't just a midwife. She was a wife who had been pushed too far. Serafina stood in the hospital corridor, taking slow, deliberate breaths. Her hands were steady, her face calm, but inside, she was anything but. For years, she had swallowed disappointment. She had ignored warning signs. She had convinced herself that Malachi would change, that he was just going through a phase, that he would return to her and their son completely. But now, standing here in her scrubs, with his mistress's child just delivered by her own hands, she knew the truth. Malachi was never going to change. And neither was she. She wasn't the same woman who had once begged for his attention, who had excused his late nights and cold replies. That woman was gone. And the woman standing here now? She was ready to walk away. A few minutes later, the hospital door swung open, and Malachi stepped out. He looked like a man who had been hit by a truck, drained, guilty, unsure of what to say. But Serafina didn't move. She didn't flinch. She simply looked at him, waiting. Serafina, his voice was hesitant, almost weak. She raised an eyebrow. Yes, Malachi? He swallowed hard, rubbing the back of his neck. I didn't know. She let out a humorless chuckle. You didn't know what? That I work here? That I might be on shift? Or that your affair would eventually catch up with you?
His jaw tightened.
It's not like that. Serafina tilted her head. Really? Then tell me what it is like, Malachi. Explain it to me. He opened his mouth, but then closed it again. Because what was there to explain? That he had betrayed her? That he had built a life with another woman while she had been raising their son alone? Nothing he said could make it better. Serafina crossed her arms, her voice dangerously calm. You brought your mistress here. To my hospital. For me to deliver her child. And now what? You want me to feel sorry for you? I didn't plan for this to happen. Of course you didn't. Her voice was sharp. Men like you never plan. You just do whatever you want and hope your wife will stay quiet. Malachi let out a slow breath. Serafina, No, she held up a hand, cutting him off.
You don't get to talk.
Not this time. I have spent years listening to your excuses. Years waiting for you to act like a husband, like a father.
But now.
She took a step closer, her eyes locked onto his. I'm done. Malachi stiffened. What do you mean? I mean, I'm done being your wife. I'm done being second place in my own marriage. I'm done waiting for you to grow up. His eyes widened. Serafina, don't say that. We can fix this. She actually laughed. A bitter, exhausted laugh. Fix this. She gestured back toward the delivery room. You just had a baby with another woman. There is no fixing this, Malachi. There's just accepting it. And I do. She reached into her pocket and pulled out something small, something that had been weighing her down for years. Her wedding ring. Without a second thought, she placed it in his hand. His fingers curled around it, as if holding on to a piece of the past. Serafina, she shook her head. Don't. And then, with a deep breath, she turned and walked away. For the first time in a long time, Serafina felt light. She had spent years carrying the weight of a broken marriage, of betrayal, of loneliness. But now she was free. And as she stepped out of the hospital, into the crisp evening air, she realized something else. She wasn't just walking away from Malachi. She was walking toward herself.
Toward a new life.
And this time, she wasn't looking back. That brings us to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Kindly subscribe to my YouTube channel. Like, comment what you feel about the story, and share it to your family and friends. Thanks for watching.